just hopefully links you find useful to some of the things we'll be talking about. And just an FYI, this is being recorded. It will be available for playback, obviously on NearForm, but also on YouTube. And because of that, sorry, it is being live streamed to YouTube and LinkedIn as we speak. So let's get to it. Today, we're talking about the development of software as a service. And we're going to talk about a few things like, what's the right approach to this kind of development, and, how can we make a good result from it? Why is strategy such an important thing when it comes to development like this? Is it possible to actually create apps quickly whilst maintaining quality? And really, how can people get repeated development success? I mean, that's what we're in the business of doing, and we hope we can transfer some of that to you too. So here to talk about all of this, because it's not me going to be talking about it, we have Dean McDonnell, who's one of our technical directors. Hey, Dean. Hello. And we have Damien Simonin Feugas, who's one of our delivery architects. Hey, Damien.
Hello.
Both of these people have years of experience building, deploying these sort of as a service solutions that we're talking about, but also kind of thinking through these challenges that, organizations beyond ourselves have to deal with, and how we can actually do these things in a repeatable way. So look, I'm looking forward to this. It's going to be about 30 minutes. We don't have a hard stop in this, but we'll go for about 30 minutes. Let's just jump right in at that deep end there. So if we're going to talk about, I suppose, SaaS development done right, that must mean there's things that are wrong with SaaS development today. So Dean, what are those top things, those top problems that would be kind of occupying your thoughts on a daily basis?
Yeah, so I suppose from a wider business context, I'll let Damien do the tech bit. What we tend to see is there's little investment into kind of sustaining the core of SaaS apps. So very much a focus on feature delivery and kind of getting your MVP out the door, but not necessarily a lot of investment after the initial investment into the SaaS platform itself. So I suppose there's always a lot of talk at the start of projects where, we want to be in an MVP mindset and move fast. But I think in the last episode, Damien Beresford mentioned the idea of day one and day two, right? So the concept that you would go MVP in day one, but what's going to happen after that? What happens after you launch your MVP and it's great? So I think there's not a real effort to empower teams long term in terms of kind of developing out that core and keeping it stable and maybe reusing it again over time. And I suppose Damien can give you the technical ones.
Yeah.
Well, any application development, we all have the same challenges. But when we do deploy stuff to the cloud, we face some very specific technical challenges. Like typically, how do we manage this remote environment, and how do we manage multiple environments? How do we reliably deploy them? These applications, how do we scale that up and down? These are very cloud-specific concerns. Like when your application is live, it has a data model. How do we make this data model evolving as we still have customers, using the application? These are concerns that will pile up with regular challenges we face when developing applications, such as how do I test it? How do I make it my testing strategy? How do I automate it? Or in general, the necessity to shorten the feedback loop between your teams and your stakeholders, product owners, and so on. So these challenges, they will be in addition to the ones specific to the SaaS development, which makes things way harder than when they should be.
That's particularly interesting for me, that you're talking about things like testing and automation rather than this little piece of tech here or this little piece of tech here. So it's those types of things that can cause the problems. And I suppose we'll get into lots of the nitty gritty there, even though you've covered kind of a lot there. But I suppose to balance things out a little bit, what are some of the right things that we should all be doing when it comes to this type of SaaS development, Damien?
Well, there's this saying, use the right tool for the right job. That's very, very common to hear that. And a lot of companies kind of try to apply it. But something that is very important, in fact, is to use tools based on what the teams can actually do. So you want to keep in line your tool set with your skill set. And to me, I strongly believe it's as important as the adequacy of the tools with your needs. Okay, this is, that's one of the challenge that you have to do right. Also consider that application living on the cloud, they are usually subject to a very hard competition, and it's very frequent that companies try to evolve them constantly, add features or change them. And practically this means that you want to spend the least minimum time finding and fixing bugs. So that, again, nothing new, but it's even more important to keep your technical debt under control when you are doing SaaS development, and this from day one.
Yeah, that's funny. Is you say, like, there's nothing new. I'm an ancient former developer. As I said, I just play one on the internet now. But the core concepts that people have been struggling with for all these years, people are still struggling with. But I suppose you've kind of amped up even more. I mean, in terms of the speed at which people are going to have to iterate on these applications. Our software industry is 70, 80 years old now, and yet we still struggle with things like technical debt and fixing bugs. So I find that interesting that similarly, I am sure civil engineers still struggle with building roads. We're still struggling with some of these kind of core concepts. In the last webinar, and Dean mentioned it there a minute ago, we talked about this Polaris accelerator, and it was very focused on multi-platform development. And for SaaS development, we built another accelerator, which we call Titus. Dean, can you give us a sense of what that's about, just at a high level to get started with?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd like to clarify that Titus is our first accelerator. So, and as you see more, you're going to notice something interesting. They're all named after stars, star systems, except for Titus. Titus is named after one of our developers' dogs. That's how old it is. So, he told me, if I don't mention that, don't come back. So Titus at a high level, I suppose, like, it's the answer to, or it's our answer to what you were saying about what is the right approach, and it takes in a lot of what Damien was saying. So, I mean, at its very core, it's a base starter kit, and it's based on some trusted tech. It's based on some patterns we know work, and I think what makes it quite unique in terms of a starter kit is that it's really heavily dog-fooded, right? So we've used it on 12 projects, I suppose, at this stage. So every kind of piece of innovation that's gone into it has gone in from a real world learning. And look, the core idea of Titus is to just kind of provide a foundational set of tools and a foundational kit to get started with SaaS without encroaching too much on the per project decisions you need to make.
So that, I suppose, for people who don't know a huge amount about NearForm, fundamentally we build applications mostly for other people and for enterprises. So it's not a case of, we have one product which we optimized a single approach for that one product, and we hope it works everywhere else. As you say, like, this has been used on 12 different projects and iterated. So the richness of the experience that's gone into it, I guess, is a lot more than many people would deal with in their daily life. Now, you've both built like a ton of these types of apps over the years for customers, and using lots of different stacks. I mean, the stack we're using now is not the stack we were using. We
were all .NET once, Conor.
I was never. I can put my hand up and say I was never .NET. Python Django all the way. So when you actually sat down to kind of conceive and build Titus, what were the things that were foremost in your mind?
Yeah, so I suppose the original idea of Titus was always to be a starter kit with some front end, some back end, database, and kind of a bunch of ready to use functionality. And maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the majority of NearForm's projects are actually quite short. We do a lot of kind of kickoff and transfer style projects. So you're talking 3-month projects, get the first MVP out, get the teams trained up, and then move on. And especially with things like the COVID apps, for instance, each one taking roughly around 3 months as well. So our main objective was to be kind of very effective in that time period. We did look at a number of ready-made kits. We do make use of some things like Create React App that we'll talk about later. But what we looked at either had too much or too little. And I mean, NearForm has a really good culture of collaboration. Excuse me. We do a lot of open source, for instance, as you well know, Conor. And it kind of just seemed right to go for a tailored approach that fit our size and scope in terms of what we would need in the future.
Yeah, I think, you know, for people listening there, that 3-month thing might jump out at them because, you know, as being very surprising, you know, the amount of, even recently just been on calls with prospective customers, you know, they were expecting, and they said it straight, they were expecting to hear 8 months, 10 months, you know, this kind of thing for quite a straightforward app development. And
it makes death marches easier when they're shorter.
Yes, well, short. I don't know if that's a good thing, but yes, absolutely. And so Damien, so of those decisions, like, you know, there's lots of, you have to make all of these decisions. It's not a wide open thing where anything goes. You have to make these decisions. Can you give us a sense of like some of the ones that were made and how you got there?
Well, no surprise. The first one is really to be production ready. Because as you guys explained, we want, if we do like a design sprint for one week and customer have like a prototype, in the end, they would be very disappointed if after the first week of development, we don't have anything else. So be production ready is the first driver. Then something that is modular, thin, but yet modular, because we want the teams to have the ability to opt out any blocks, any module at no cost, because not everyone needs, you know, this particular database we included in the base kit, or this particular front end, or maybe they don't have you know, a service. So things must be modular, and that's why eventually this base kit has very few built-in, right? It has as little as necessary to be useful.
That's a lovely phrase. I think that's one that's jumped out at me from what you're talking about, particularly that, you know, I've, like everybody, I've looked at these ones out on the internet, you know, these starter kits, and it's sort of batteries included, you know, kitchen sink type approach, which makes it very difficult if what you're doing doesn't fit into their, you know, exact dimensions. So that feels very, very valuable to me. But I suppose we have been very, I won't say we've been very positive, of course we've been positive, but it sounds like we created this perfect thing, you know, on the first sprint. And, you know, we all know that's not it.
Not at all. It failed the first time around.
Okay, you go.
And the second time around as well. So,
well, tell us more about that. Like, tell us about that evolution.
So I suppose, and this is when I talk about dog fooding, this is the sort of kind of context I want to give. When we first started Titus, we did it naively. So we looked at what did we feel would save us time. So we looked back at projects and we looked at things like, you know, well, it was difficult to do authorization quickly and in a production ready manner. We looked at the amount of time spent selecting CSS frameworks and all that sort of jazz. And in the end, we made it a kitchen sink, like all the other ones out there. And it didn't work because there was so much to take back out, or there was so much on a per project basis that needed to change, that although the idea was sound, the practicality wasn't there. And we have a really good kind of a way about us in NearForm, and that, like, we don't force the teams to use these things. They have to be useful on their own, right? So nobody's going to use Titus if it's a big old kitchen sink and they have to pull pieces out of it. They'll just go and use whatever technologies are available. The other thing, I suppose, is we didn't really consider in the first instance how much time you save by just doing things like making sure that tests are set up and working correctly. How much time is saved by just ensuring that when the front end devs come on, Storybook is working and the application is all connected up to kind of visual testing, etc. So that was something we underestimated massively the first time around. And then, of course, bit rot was a constant problem, because when you have this big old framework, it comes with a big old dependency list, etc. So that caused a major issue as well. Now, look, we fixed all that in the end, right? And over the years, we tuned and got better at it. And I suppose what you see now is definitely much smaller. And to Damien's point, it's very much just enough and not anything else.
So a kind of an Occam's razor kind of thing going on there, I guess.
Yeah, but with a lot of bleeding on the way down.
Okay. And Damien, when you came to it, so you weren't there from day one. When you came to it, like where were the challenges you saw and the bits you may have struggled with initially?
Something that a lot of NearFormers contributing to this project faced as well. So we do have about 100 developers in the company, and I checked yesterday, 35 of them have contributed. So it's a fair share, right? But it basically means since we don't have like a dedicated team or a product owner on this project, it means that the code consistency is very, very hard to achieve, and that's probably still a barrier we have in contributing to Titus. Also, and that's kind of the point of having senior developer in a company, they all have opinion, and we all have opinions and preferences, whether they are on tools, about tools or practices, okay? So like some project, they would want to highlight performance, or some of them would like to focus on testability, readability, on how much they could evolve in time, and these directions are pulling the project, in different directions, and like some of us like TypeScript or don't like to write mocks, or I do prefer Svelte over React. So there are all pros and cons, and finding the balance so we can have constructive debate and in the end take decision that will last in time, and given how a company can do and wants to do, this balance is very, very hard to find.
Okay.
And still hard to find.
But the balance word is jumping out at me there, and actually I hadn't realized, Dean, that it was all written in TypeScript. So that's a major thing.
No, it's not all written in TypeScript. And I'd just like to call out, if you go and PR a TDS file, yay, but if you go and try and change it to TypeScript, it's not happening. We already have JavaScript in there. Okay. So joking aside. I think the important point that Damien is getting across is true, is that even to this day, even though Titus is really, really useful, there's a lot of everyday effort to maintain something that's very, very simple. And that's because there's a lot of competing, like NearForm does a range of projects. I suppose we span across a lot of verticals. So you have a situation where you need something that's generic enough, so SaaS, but that could be any SaaS, that could be internal kind of internal projects. It could be like big data science platforms for customers. It can be anything. So the balance and trying to find it, and also in terms of like practical investment resources, right? So in terms of, we have to spend money to ensure Titus is maintained. Ultimately, people have to get paid, etc. So there is some kind of there is still some kinks, etc. to work out. But overall, I would say we're very pleased in terms of where we've got it to and the balance that we've struck, while still kind of realizing that it is a delicate balance that you have to constantly maintain. You can't just kind of do it, throw it over the wall, and call it done.
Well, so I like the idea you're saying there of almost like this sort of ongoing internal tension, but tension in a good way, that it's not, we built this thing, it's perfect, and this is what we're using forevermore, because that's irrelevance is where you end up, I think, if you take that approach. And we, as I said earlier on, we're a professional services company. We build applications for companies, but what we also do a lot of is this sort of, and there's lots of phrases for it, technology transfer and so on. But it's really, teaching the customers to fish, showing them how they can build apps the same way we do. So, Dean, do clients actually make use of this? The one, our clients that have kind of received projects from Titus, do they then go and use it themselves?
Yeah, so it's all Apache licensed, which means customers can use it without any kind of licensing difficulties, etc. It's not a product that we sell. Kind of their devs can go in and have a look and see if it'll actually give them value, etc. But they use it in a lot of ways. So they may use it just as a basis for their own kind of further SaaS innovation. So they'll just take it as is, tailor it to the customer needs, maybe add whatever specific internal authorization they're using. But you also see interesting usages. So we've had one customer who just kind of dropped the front end piece and made it a microservices piece. So not necessarily SaaS, but it had all the ingredients to kind of spin up a bunch of fastify microservices. So they use it in a lot of different ways. But I suppose that, they don't directly contribute code, right? So it tends to be a little bit trickier there because we're dealing with kind of business kind of agreements, etc. So what I would say is, in terms of contributions back to Titus, they tend to they make them from the point of view of features that they require, right? So if let's assume they needed Azure Active Directory, which was something we had to put in recently, that went in because of clients kind of, working with Azure Active Directory and going, hey, we do this often enough. Let's spend some time and get that functionality in there.
Yeah, and that's a point, and I ran into that last year as well. Not in a NearForm context, in a broader context, sort of the financial services industry, where they struggle a lot with getting involved in open source because of the strictures and rules and regulations, particularly regulated industries. So one of the things we're involved in is this whole inner source movement, and we're the leaders effectively because of Denise Cooper. Yeah. And we'll be talking about that in a later session. But it is a challenge, and it's a challenge way beyond Titus and way beyond this conversation. But there are ways of dealing with it. So I think that's going to be hopefully interesting to people.
Yeah, and look, there is a lot of resourcing on inner source out there. I definitely say people should check it out. Well, maybe to that point, we would push Titus into customers for them to start using it as part of their inner source journey, as opposed to kind of getting contributions directly back.
Gotcha. Okay. Now we'll talk about that. One thing we haven't dived into yet is the nitty-gritty of the actual tech and some of the very specific technology decisions made. But I suppose before we do that, can we just even talk about what specific part or parts of Titus just kind of do it for you, really sing for you? Damien, what would be the thing that you particularly like about Titus?
The tests. Not the tests themselves, but the fact that
fantastic tests, Conor. Best tests.
The fact that everything is wired together, and you don't, there are many tools because there are many different approaches in testing. So we picked up a couple of ones that, again, we believe worked for our cases, right? And namely Storybook and Jest, even on the back end. I know some people may be annoyed by that, but still works very well. And saving a few hours or days when you start your project, just because everything is wired and you don't have to think about it, I think it's a nice thing to have.
Oh, yeah, and it's an interesting one. Like, again, you didn't pick it's this framework, whatever. It's actually test. It's something a kind of a meta thing on top of everything there, which is very cool. And Dean, for you, what's that that one thing, if you had to pick one thing?
Yeah, and I suppose maybe just to Damien's point, the whole developer experience. We spent a really long time on that side of things to get it right. So people can contribute whenever they want, but it's got all the usual kind of good stuff for developers. It's got the database commands in there. It's got all the testing. You may not like the frameworks, but it's easy to take them out, as Damien alluded to. We avoid things like CSS because that's probably a per project decision anyway, but we've got really good stuff like the basis of a documentation starter kit, so that if you want to start documenting your SaaS, it's there and ready to go. We got loads of bits on kind of GitHub Actions, etc., for good practice CI/CD, and then we wrap everything up in commands to make that easy if you want to swap over. So Yeah, just I think the whole developer experience and how they can kind of contribute and change it around and then make it really nice for themselves, for me.
Would that worry the, some software development managers out there going, ooh, that sounds a bit like anarchy to me, jumping on the latest tech cat with a laser pointer, and how does that help my customers? Is it a problem? Could it be a problem?
Well, look, come here. Anarchy is not a terrible way to describe it. Controlled anarchy, I suppose. We do have guardrails, of course, right? So we make sure that yes, you can accept or you can make pull requests willy-nilly, but that doesn't mean they'll be accepted. There's a lot of ensuring that whatever is coming in is right for the project, and I think we have a good understanding amongst the dev team now of what Titus is and what it isn't. So we tend to get nice informed positions, but I suppose we would trust the experience of our devs, right? We're blessed, I suppose, in that we have a really senior team of kind of creatives, etc. And it's a mistake to try and hem them in, right? It's a mistake to say you shouldn't be allowed to dictate this. It should come from some architect who's sitting in a room. You should yes, devs may have a kind of not necessarily a whole experience like an architect, but they still give you the small experience and how it felt and how it worked on a day-to-day basis. So they'll resist and fight against projects if you don't give them kind of some way to make the experience well for themselves. So Titus for us has been a great way to channel that.
Sorry, Damien.
Yeah, just one more word on that. It's developers who wrote the project in the end for your customer. So you want them to have enough freedom so they can express their talent, but you don't want to pivot every week because there's a new fancy thing that just came out. So back to the principles, like be production ready, be in line with your skill sets, and that actually these are drivers that really helps you taking decision. And software design decision. Okay, can I afford it? Yes or no? Given what's in stake and the people around me.
And you both kind of talked there about kind of that channeling and the creativity. I mean, I've long thought the word creatives should be applied to people in the software industry as well. It tends to be
definitely not engineers.
No, the artist.
You need a little cert to be an engineer. We're all artists here.
We are all artists.
Yeah, con artists.
Fundamentally. Stop. Now we're not quite on the 30 minutes, and we'll run a little bit over, I think, because we've a little bit to go. But what we haven't done, as I said, is we've touched on it. But Damien, can you give us the highlights in terms of some of the tech choices that were made? Some of the tech choices that are currently made, and tell people a little bit about those.
Okay, I'll try to be short. It's a monorepo. It's a monorepo at the moment with Learner, and it has 3 to 4 packages in it. So there are common stuff like as we say, Jest, Prettier, ESLint, LintStage. So common and useful small tools that make the developer experience better. Then on the front end, it's a Create React application, so it's React in the end. We just added React Router and Formic and Nginx, which are like generic things that we have in most of our projects. React projects. There is Storybook Wired, as we said, and feature-wise, it's very, very thin. There's only a login page and a almost empty dashboard, and the login is simply a showcase, so you can use the authentication connectors that we provide. So either on AWS Cognito through Amplify, or Azure Active Directory and Auth0 as well. On the backend side, it's a Fastify web server, which exposes.
Can I just say, Matteo Colina approved Fastify backend server. Thank you very much.
Very important.
Seal of approval, yes. Yeah. So it's a Fastify web server providing just the REST endpoints needed for these authentication providers. In addition to that, there are all the Plumbary you need to configure it through environment variables, something aligned with the 12-factor apps. And there are also two plugs for secret managers from GCP or AWS, depending on what you're using. There's a beautiful Pinot logger that helps logging the front end side, the back end side, but also the front end side, collecting the logs. And we do have a Postgres database connection pool for the sake of demonstration, again, because there's a lot of projects in which we use Postgres, but that's easily removable if you don't need to. Just one last word on the back end. There's a health check. So it's silly because it does a little, but actually it does it smartly. It will return 5 or 3 responses when being under pressure, typically when the event loop becomes delayed, or if your memory is hitting some threshold you can configure. And that's very useful because when running this inside a Kubernetes cluster, as we mentioned earlier, there are people trying to using Titus in a microservice context. So it's really useful to have that from day one. Okay, you don't have to think about it then. Finally, there's a Postgres database manager. So it's just a package that allows you to seed and apply migration on your Postgres database, either through a standalone web server, or you can deploy it inside an AWS Lambda function. Or finally, you can simply require it as a Node.js module and call, the migration function. So to migrate your database from your own code.
And it works on all the cloud databases as well. So we've tested against Cloud SQL, GCP SQL, all the cloud SQLs.
Excellent. We're coming to close to the end now, but before I ask just the last couple of questions there, if people do have any questions, just pop them into that Q&A box down the end. It's like we're on YouTube or something.
Wanted to do that.
So subscribe. We've never done the subscribe thing. Gosh,
win a set of likes. No.
So if people are looking for that Christmas project and they want to help out and contribute to Titus, are they able to, Dean?
Absolutely not. Yes, they are, of course. So one caveat, I suppose, is that it's ran as BDFL. Okay, so for those in the back, benevolent dictator for life. And ultimately, all that means is, as I suppose we've discussed here, is Titus is useful to us. It's something we use all the time. And that means we take a kind of a strong opinion on what should be in and what shouldn't be in. However, it is Apache open source. It's all there. Links are in the channel. And you can come and you can give opinions and you can commit things to it, updates, fixes, changes. But I suppose if something isn't accepted, we'll give you a reason why we feel it's not, etc. But just to note, what we would really hope is that you actually take a copy of Titus and make it your own. So that would be kind of a real big win for us, is for folks to send back kind of information, say, hey, look, I took Titus internally, we're starting to use it, we made the following changes, we turned it into TypeScript.
Please let us know.
Yeah, it's svelte now. Let Damien know if you put svelte in it. But yeah, that's how we would envision it being used and contribute to.
Okay, and can you give for a similar audience? Can you give us a sense of some of the things that may be coming in the future for Titus?
Yeah, so as Damien mentioned, it's Lerna right now, and I suppose it's Lerna because Lerna gives us some convenience functions that we use, like running commands over the whole repository and allowing us to package a kind of a small MVP together and break it out later. But we are possibly looking to replace that. So myself and Matteo are doing some kind of edge case checking there to see what do we really know, what do we really need. So expect some kind of tooling there that'll look good. We got the usual kind of updates, etc. We're always testing it against all new functionality. So it uses it runs now on things like GCP Cloud Run. It runs on Mira, which is our new AWS stuff that we're going to talk about next episode. Tune in, everybody. Hit the subscribe button now. And I think as well, another big feature that I think is actually being released today. So if I remember correctly, there might be a blog post that went out today. And if it's not today, it's going tomorrow. No. But it talks about an admin piece that was originally supposed to go in Titus, but we've been very strict about what goes into Titus. So one of our senior kind of our principal devs, Simonin, he's been working on it, and it's essentially an admin piece that goes with Titus. I won't give away the details. I think we should do another episode on it, but it's very, very interesting, and it fits very well with Titus in terms of well, what if I need users and groups and permissions, which is usually the second question that comes up.
Okay.
It's a great showcase for GraphQL. I'm not spoiling
it's
it.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Yes, it is fantastic.
That's something that may actually eventually end up in Titus as well, because we're using, when we started it like a few years ago, GraphQL was not a thing, but it is right now, and we're using it in a lot of our projects. So that may be something that make its way up to Titus.
So you may see similar kind of functionality around what's there for Postgres for kind of GraphQL installations as well, some kind of sugar around it, because we're seeing it a lot, especially for kind of bigger data sets, etc.
Very cool. Okay, well, thanks a million, guys. We have a couple of small questions there, which I'll get into now. I mean, I learned a ton from that. I always learn when I'm talking to you people. It's amazing. So just
you are our people, Conor.
Yeah.
We accept you.
Oh, thank you. I feel part of it all. So there was a couple of mentions there of Svelte. Could you, I suppose the question is, can you imagine something replacing React in the next 18 to 24 months? Could it be something like Svelte?
Okay, my opinion then. Only my opinion. No, I do believe it'll be a serious competitor at some point, except for the fact that behind React, it's Facebook and the whole ecosystem and the whole community behind it. So it takes a while and also a lot of money to build such a big community around a project. So for that reason, I think Svelte is a nice competitor in terms of how it feels, especially on the developer experience. Honestly, it's just try it. You see how quickly you can achieve a very nice results. But when it comes to professional development, it's very company needs the confidence that they can get support, they can get a lot of plugins, they can get a lot of examples and a lot of experts around the world that know the technology and can help them in case of any issue. So that's something that is very hard to achieve, and I hope that at some point Svelte will have it as well. But I guess it's still the main blocker for the short term.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Very cool. And one other question there was: Google Cloud is kind of mentioned as I
love Google Cloud. Big up Google.
No, so is the preferred cloud? Is there a reason from a Titus perspective why it's?
Yes. So the reason is because Google Cloud was the new shiny. It was the latest new shiny, and that was the one that we were playing with at the time. So specifically, it runs. We were playing around with Google Cloud Run, which is a new service to kind of put up simpler installations, and we had some client work we wanted to get done with Kubernetes on GCP. So it's up there just because that was the last one we've done. I would say in terms of how do we actually use it, I would say vast majority is AWS because it's still kind of lingua franca for a lot of businesses. I would say Azure is coming in a distant second for now, but we're starting to see a lot of push from Microsoft, so we may see different numbers. But what I find interesting is GCP is starting to accelerate. So as they become more mature in terms of dev documentation, etc., I do expect it to be there. What I will say is everything should be done in such a way in the GitHub Actions to ensure that you can move it from one to the other. They all have equivalent kind of Kubernetes services / easy to kind of build services like container running services, etc.
Perfect, brilliant. Okay, we're right up against time here. We won't run over anymore on everybody. I'd just like to thank you both again, guys. This was phenomenal. I hope everybody who's dialed in has found it as valuable as I did.
Thank the audience, of course.
Yeah, and thank the audience. Thank you for attending. We really appreciate it. And actually on that, for anybody who actually registered to attend rather than watching the live stream and so on, we'll be sending out just a kind of a PDF with lots of the information we've talked about here and links and so on. But if you register at nearform.com/decode for the future ones, you too can get that information. Keep an eye out for the next installment. It'll be early in the new year. As Dean mentioned, it's going to be about mirrors. It's going to be all about serverless. So I love serverless.
The new hotness.
Say that again.
The new hotness.
The new hotness. And we have our serverless experts who'll be on talking about that. So yeah, thanks again, everybody. Thanks, guys, and have a good Christmas, everyone, even though we're only on the 3rd.
Oh God, yes. Thank you very much, Conor.
And
thank you very much, folks.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye-bye.